We begin with what could be a blockbuster day in Washington. With just days left in this year's term, the Supreme Court will hand down its next round of opinions this morning, and that might include major rulings that could impact millions of Americans. We're talking about cases that focus on student loans, LGBTQ rights, and the future of affirmative action. And when it comes to affirmative action, like many other issues, Americans are firmly divided along party lines. An NBC News poll in April found that 80% of Democrats believed affirmative action was needed to counteract the effects of discrimination against minorities. That's up from 67% of Democrats way back in a 1991 poll. As for the GOP, today only 25% of Republicans support affirmative action. That is a huge drop from 30 years ago when that number was 55%. For more, we are joined by former prosecutor and MSNBC legal analyst Kristen Gibbons-Fedden. So it's actually two cases that are focused on affirmative action here in higher education. One involved Harvard, the other the University of North Carolina. Help us understand, what are both sides arguing on this contentious issue? What are the stakes here?
Well, the Supreme Court actually is hearing them as one case, even though they're two separate schools. And that's because the arguments are the same. Both schools, in this case, the decision, the Students for Fair Admissions Incorporated is actually arguing that both schools separately are discriminating against Asian American applicants, and that they're being disadvantaged in the application process because both of those schools are essentially, allegedly, overemphasizing race in the admissions process and rejecting workable race-neutral alternatives. And what does that have to do with the law? Well, they're arguing that the schools are violating the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits discrimination in institutions. The schools, alternatively, are arguing that they're not discriminating and that these policies are crucial for promoting diversity, and that their policies and methods are actually in line with precedent, specifically Grutter v. Bollinger and the Regents v. University of California v. Bake decisions, because those decisions permitted race-conscious admission in the least restrictive.
So, Kristen, this is the most diverse Supreme Court in American history. It is also a conservative court. Conservatives hold a 6-3 majority. Usually when the arguments are made, the justices give us clues, a glimpse as to how they might vote. So does it look like they're going to side along those ideological lines, or were there perhaps a couple conservative justices who seemed more undecided?
I think an ideological ruling on these affirmative action cases would not come as a surprise, to be honest with you. But still, I think nuances do exist, as you kind of pointed out, within this conservative majority, with some conservatives showing kind of openness to contextual race consideration. If you think about those oral arguments for this particular case, we heard Chief Justice Roberts, along with Justices Barrett and Kavanaugh, maybe revealing a small opening to considering personal experiences related to race to be part of the admissions policy. Now, that doesn't mean that they support race-conscious admissions, but it certainly gives some factors to play.
So, Kristen, we should note a couple decades ago, 9 states, that includes California and Florida, they actually banned affirmative action for college admission. So does this ruling have any impact on those states?
Yeah, absolutely. Could bolster the legal position that those 9 states have already taken in their efforts to ban affirmative action. It also could influence other states to approach diversity in education in that way and ban it altogether, which really could result in a ruling that changes the trajectory of admission policies throughout the nation in a negative way.
Right there, we see those states that have already taken this step. All right, Kristen Gibbons-Fedden, thank you so much for your analysis this morning as we await this huge decision. Appreciate it. Colleges and universities are also grappling with the possibility that race may no longer be a factor in admissions. NBC News senior legal correspondent Laura Jarrett shows us how they're preparing.
For many elite schools, the writing from the nation's high court is on the wall.
How worried are you?
I'm extremely worried.
Danielle Hawley is the incoming president of Mount Holyoke College in Western Massachusetts. But this peaceful campus belies an anxious reality. The Supreme Court will answer the most anticipated question this term. Can colleges and universities look at race in admissions decisions?
Everyone is talking about this case all the time. People from departments that are not in the law school are asking me, what day will we hear?
For decades, the court recognized the educational benefits of a diverse student body and said schools can look at someone's race as one plus factor among many. But the court's current conservative majority may ban it nationwide this time.
What will that do to a place like Mount Holyoke?
It will send a very strong message to Black students and to Latina students that they are not welcome.
Not so, say the lawyers who sued Harvard over its admissions plan. Long treated by the court as the gold standard, it's now accused of being obsessed with race, and along with the University of North Carolina, of discriminating against Asian students, which the schools deny but was emphasized during oral arguments.
Asians should be getting into Harvard more than whites, but they don't because Harvard gives them significantly lower personal ratings. Harvard ranks Asians less likable, confident, and kind.
If the court agrees using race violates the law, schools may still look at an applicant's finances, zip code, or even consider essays about overcoming adversity, so-called race-neutral alternatives.
Universities just cannot consider race itself.
Colleges tell NBC News they are prepared to adapt if required, expanding financial aid, scrapping SAT scores, or getting rid of legacy admissions, all potentially on the table. But Holly says ignoring race would produce a devastating result.
We've seen a track record of them not working.
She points to California, one of 9 states that outlawed affirmative action more than 20 years ago, causing a 50% drop-off in minority admissions, numbers that have never bounced back, as seen by UC Berkeley.
I have struggled to really move the Black number here at Berkeley, and that, again, that's not from a lack of trying.
Femi Ogundele, Berkeley's Dean of Undergrad Admissions, says affirmative action was never perfect, just a Band-Aid.
The fact that there are high schools in this country that have manicured lawns and golf courses, and there are high schools in this country that have bars on the windows and metal detectors in the hallways, and yet we are asking both of those students to show up in our application process the same, doesn't make any sense.
For now, schools are bracing for the dawn of a new era, making the task of equalizing the playing field not impossible, but significantly harder. Laura Jarrett, NBC News, South Hadley, Massachusetts.
Turning overseas now, and Russia is dealing with the aftermath of Saturday's aborted mutiny by the mercenary Wagner group. This morning, we heard from Russia's FSB, that's the main security service in Russia. The FSB said that it was closing its criminal investigation into the armed rebellion. On top of that, Russian state media, citing the defense ministry, said preparations were underway for the transfer of the group's heavy military equipment to Russia's armed forces. The steps come after both President Putin and the head of the Wagner Group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, spoke yesterday for the first time since the incident. President Biden also addressed the short-lived mutiny. Take a listen to what he said.
We made clear that we were not involved. We had nothing to do with it. This was part of a struggle within the Russian system. We're going to keep assessing the fallout of this weekend's events and the implications for Russia and Ukraine. But it's still too early to reach a definitive conclusion about where this is going.
NBC News foreign correspondent Kelly Kobiea joins us now from Kyiv. So, Kelly, walk us through the steps that were actually taken by Moscow this morning. Why is the FSB dropping its case against the Wagner Group?
So, Joe, the statement is pretty short, but what the FSB says is essentially the reason those cases are being dropped is because the soldiers involved, those Wagner fighters, didn't march all the way to Moscow because they stopped, turned around, and in the FSB's words, the actions aimed at committing a crime didn't happen. It falls in line with this deal that was orchestrated, put together by the president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, in which the Kremlin announced on Saturday that none of these fighters, nor any of the leaders, frankly, would be held accountable, that none of them would be charged criminally. And at this point, you have an interesting situation developing because President Putin last night said that he would honor terms of that deal and he would allow Wagner fighters as well to choose their fate, essentially. They could go home, they could join the Russian military, or they could go to Belarus. And that leads on to this statement by the defense ministry, the Russian state media citing the defense ministry, saying that they're turning over all of their equipment. So the question remains, do they join the Russian military? Do they stay in the fight in Ukraine? Or do they sort of join their leader, Prigozhin, in Belarus? Joe?
You know, Kelly, we know President Putin spoke again a little earlier this morning, giving a speech to the military and law enforcement. That's in addition to his speech yesterday. So what are we hearing from Putin right now? And what about Prigozhin's comments? Do we even know if he made it to Belarus?
Sure. So Putin spoke in the heart of the Kremlin today. It was very much about imagery, standing in front of soldiers, giving this speech, thanking the security services he said, for doing their job, telling the National Guard essentially that they helped to stop a civil war in Ukraine. And also, for the first time, I think, recognizing that Russian pilots were killed on Saturday during this insurrection, holding a minute's silence for those pilots during those talks today. Interestingly, he also said that he was not ruling out that Western security services could have been involved in Saturday's event, saying that it may have been inspired by the West and overlapped with Prigozhin's ambitions. In his speech last night, he went further. He called the leaders of that movement traitors, but he did say that the overwhelming majority of Wagner fighters were patriots, and he was almost asking them to join the fold, to stay within the Russian military. Prigozhin, for his part, said he never meant to mount a coup. He was only on a protest march. And in terms of his whereabouts, Joe, we still can't confirm that he's in Belarus, but his plane has been tracked through Flight Radar 24 as going from St. Petersburg to southern Russia and then to Minsk, the Belarusian capital, at some point this morning.
Of course, we should add President Biden denying any American involvement here. Kelly, meanwhile, there is still a war going on in Ukraine. Real quick, what's the latest on the battlefield?
Yeah, President Zelensky projecting the image of hope, of progress. He said there's been progress on all fronts. He visited troops on the front line yesterday. That video has been playing quite a bit here over the past few hours. And he said that they've looked at operational decisions as well. Whether that means there's some sort of change in strategy on the battlefield, we don't know. But they are sort of projecting this image of unity, strength, and progress on this side.
Right. Kelly Kobiea in Kyiv. Kelly, thank you so much. Let's bring in Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis for more on this. He is a senior fellow and military expert at Defense Priorities. Good to have you with us. So first off, I just want to get your reaction to these moves by Moscow this morning. Are you surprised the FSB is dropping its criminal case into this armed mutiny? What do you think that means?
Yeah, I think that what that's telling you is that Russia just wants to move past this with the least amount of collateral damage as possible. Putin wants to preserve his warfighting capacity as much as he can, both within the regular military and potentially with Wagner forces going forward. And, if they had gone forward with any kind of criminal proceedings, it would have been really hard to try to pick which one of the Wagner group, that you would go after. And then, of course, you have the problem that Wagner is a very close-knit family kind of an organization. They build that into their system. And it could potentially have turned all of them against them. So I think that to try to minimize the damage, they felt that it was better to go this direction. And hence the reason why Putin actually offered them to join the Russian military or allowed them to go to Belarus or home.
Did you hear anything from Putin's comments or Prigozhin that suggests this whole episode is actually over? I mean, do you think the Wagner group is going to go quietly?
Yes, I do, because, look, this never had a chance to succeed if it was actually some sort of insurrection. Because, look, the Wagner Group gets all of its supplies, ammunition, fuel, vehicles, aircraft, everything from the Ministry of Defense. So without the Ministry of Defense supporting them, all they had with the bullets they had in their truck, and, that would have run out quickly. So they never really had a chance to succeed. They could have caused a huge problem. And I think that Prigozhin probably actually did want to get rid of the Minister of Defense and the Senior General Gerasimov. It appears that didn't work. And in fact, it appears that his gamble did fail because now he's lost control of the Wagner Group to some extent. Though I will point out that there's news this morning that Belarus is now building a new military base for the Wagner groups of about 8,000 people which they're trying to get up to very quick. So it appears that they're going to regenerate in some form in Belarus.
Let's talk about what this means for the war in Ukraine. This aborted mutiny was brief, but did it present an opportunity for Ukraine to make gains in the war? I mean, how do you assess this counteroffensive so far?
You know, everybody would love that to be the case, and certainly Kiev wanted that to be the case. They looked for it, but the problem is that this offensive has been almost a uniform failure from what it should have been doing and what they wanted it to do from the outset. In that, after now 3 full weeks of this offensive, they have still not penetrated even the first line of the Russians' defense. And the reasons are fundamental. They don't have anywhere near enough air power, air defense, artillery shells, and they don't have enough demining equipment to get through the many belts of Russian defenses. And you had Kirby yesterday really illustrating the problem when he emphasized how well the Russian defense had trained and prepared and how hard it is to go forward, implying that this probably isn't going to go too much further. And that's certainly something I agree with.
All right. Lieutenant Colonel Davis, appreciate your analysis. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Always my pleasure. Thank you.
The severe weather that has been impacting huge sections of the country for days is showing no signs of letting up. The Northeast is dealing with severe storms, while the South is bracing for more suffocating heat. The severe weather is creating a travel nightmare at airports all across the country. NBC News correspondent Sam Brock brings us the latest.
Good morning. For anyone who's spent a considerable amount of time in Louisiana over the summer, you know conditions here can be brutal. Even by that standard, we are looking at an exceptional set of circumstances right now. Most of southeast Louisiana is under an excessive heat warning, which is to say somewhere in the range of low triple-digit temperatures, but then a heat index factoring in humidity that feels around 113 to as much as 120 degrees, according to the city of New Orleans. Now, I'm right now in Baton Rouge. This warning includes Baton Rouge, Slidell, and New Orleans, which is going to be holding a public event later today. The mayor there, LaToya Cantrell, updating the public on what they're doing to keep people safe. That includes opening up dozens of pools and community centers, cooling centers, as folks here are dealing with just oppressive heat. There is a heat dome right now that is just sitting over a section of the country. Nearly 50 million people are under an excessive heat warning. That spreads over 13 states. We're talking about really from Arizona and New Mexico all the way through Texas, Oklahoma, Alabama, Mississippi, even parts of Florida. So this is a huge swath of the country right now that is buckling from this heat, while at the same time, we've seen all of these severe thunderstorms really up and down the East Coast. Was the most recent activity from the Carolinas all the way to New Hampshire. There was flooding in Pennsylvania. In New Hampshire, actually, folks were forced out of their homes, or at least surrounded by water, as roads were literally being washed away. So you have this juxtaposition right now of active weather, tornadic activity. There were some 6 reported tornadoes in Wyoming, another one in Nebraska. That all continues as the heat really right now is sinking in the southern part of the United States. One more point to make here, which is just the power outages. Tennessee right now is the worst state, with some 70,000 customers without power. Texas, we've talked about ERCOT before and the electricity. They are at about 10 or 11,000 people without power. ERCOT, which manages that 90% of the electrical load for the state of Texas, says that the grid conditions right now are normal. They're not asking people to conserve, but to say to be wise with their energy usage. Here in Louisiana, it's a few thousand people without power, but everyone right now bracing for what's ahead, because this excessive heat is supposed to extend not just today, but through the rest of the week and into the weekend. That's the latest here in Baton Rouge. Back to you.
All right, Sam Brock, thank you so much. So that's the question. Any relief in sight? Let's get a check at your Morning News Now weather forecast with meteorologist Michelle Grossman. Hey, Michelle, good morning.
Hey there, Joe. Great to see you. And unfortunately, I wish we could say there was an end in sight, but this is going to continue for days. And as Sam mentioned, into the weekend, we've been tracking this for weeks and weeks and weeks, and we're going to continue to track it. We're also tracking the chance for severe storms. We had some really heavy rainfall, some strong storms in the Northeast last night. We're going to see that reignite later on today. Also watching the chance for some strong storms in the middle of the country. So radar showing us that story where you see the brighter colors, the reds, the oranges, the yellows throughout the plains. We're going to see the chance for some strong storms throughout the central plains later on today, and also the chance for some really heavy downpours in the Northeast. This is why we have that cold front that's moving through. It's moving off to the east. We have an area of low pressure that's sort of spinning over the Great Lakes. That's moving along with it. So it's bringing the chance for those storms from Maine to South Carolina. And you see those bright colors once again. That's where we're anticipating the chance for heavy rainfall. We had that, as Sam mentioned, overnight, where we saw over 6 inches in some spots in the Northeast. And we're going to add to those totals today. Then tomorrow morning, more rounds of showers developing across the New England area. Locally, heavy rain is possible once again, so that could lead to some flooding as it did last night. Rainfall amounts anywhere from a quarter inch to a half inch up to an inch plus. Where you see the oranges and reds, that's where we're anticipating the chance for some heavy downpours. So that's really going to be locally heavy downpours. It's sort of hard to pinpoint where that will fall. We do have a severe weather threat later on this afternoon. Less than yesterday, 6 million still though at risk for winds gusting up to 70 miles per hour, damaging hail 2 inches or larger. Also a few tornadoes. Where you see the orange, including Dodge City, Woodward, also Tulsa, that's an enhanced risk. That is the likeliest spot of where we will see those storms. And this graphic sort of shows you where we could see hurricane force winds. So 75 plus mile per hour winds in the hatched area. That includes also Tulsa, Woodward, and Dodge City. Then tomorrow we're going to see that severe weather threat move into the Midwest. So Minneapolis, you could see some strong storms tomorrow with winds gusting over 60 miles per hour, some hail, and also the chance of a tornado. That's the storm story. Then we have the record highs where we're going to see temperatures soaring into the triple digits once again. And look at all these heat alerts stretching from the southwest parts of Arizona into the south central states, the Florida panhandle, but now stretching into parts of the Ohio Valley. So we're talking about Indiana, even the Tennessee Valley, Kentucky, Tennessee, you're involved in some heat alerts. That starts on Thursday, but we're going to see this heat dome expanding because this high pressure is anchored in place and it's not going to budge. 49 million Americans under some sort of heat alert. We do have excessive heat warnings once again in Texas, and this is why. Temperatures into the triple digits. Houston, 100 degrees, and then we're going to factor in the humidity. So feeling like 107 in Houston today, 109 in Shreveport, and Joe, we're going to feel like 111 in Lake Charles, and these numbers are going to look very similar as we head towards tomorrow and the rest of the work week.
Looks like that for the last few days. Sounds like it'll look like it for a few more days. All right, Michelle, thank you so much.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.